Since we're sharing stories of Swamiji, I want to begin by saying something about stories about Swamiji, because some of you, perhaps many of you, never met him in the body, and you may feel badly that you didn't, oh, these people are so lucky they got to have all these experiences, etc. And yes, we were and are lucky to have had those experiences, certainly. However, all of us have the opportunity to build our experience of Swamiji and of Master, which is really the source of Swamiji's power. Swamiji, in fact, I'll just relate, this may sound a little bit curious, but the very first, I'll just relate my first encounter with Swamiji at all, which was actually well prior to my coming to Ananda. I read The Path, and I had a profound experience reading his autobiography, now called The New Path, but in those days it was just called The Path. Autobiography of a Western Yogi was the subtitle. And I was very intrigued by the thought of a Western yogi. That concept had never occurred to me before, and so I absorbed that. But that profound experience led me to write to Swamiji. So I wrote this letter, and just sharing that I was very inspired and I wanted to come to Ananda and I wanted to dedicate myself to this. And in due course, I got a response back, but not from Swamiji personally. It was from a secretary who wrote on his behalf saying, thank you for writing, and why don't you come and visit, or why don't you come and take a program or something like that, which was a little deflating to me. But I did ultimately come after some months went by. I had to finish my school year, and I had to do some work to get some money to come to Ananda with. And I did come that following late August, early September. This was 1979. And I had hoped, now I didn't, some of these things you don't necessarily realize until later, but I had read The Path and I had read Autobiography of a Yogi at that point. So I was well aware of Yogananda meeting Sri Yukteswar and this very emotional encounter. He's been searching for a guru his entire life, basically, or certainly from late childhood, and especially after his mother left the body. Master was just churning the ether, looking for his master, looking for his guru. And finally, after some years at the Mahamandal Hermitage in Benares, he goes off to do an errand, meets Sri Yukteswar, and this encounter, my own, you have come to me. And I think on some level, all of us wish for that kind of response. We want to recognize our own, and we want to be recognized by the guru, by the teacher. You are my own. So my first encounter with Swami Kriyananda was, I didn't see him up close. I saw him from about 100 yards away. I saw his little cap that he was wearing, a European-style cap. And I saw him waving out the window of a car. And he was driving away for 3 months to a lecture tour in Europe. And this was, early September. He would not be back until sometime in December. And I finally got to be introduced to him at a Christmas party, the Christmas party at the meditation retreat in the Common Dome. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds of us jammed into this. And I shook his hand and greeted him. Okay. So I had at least met him. I took Kriya a few weeks later in January, but I never actually spoke with him personally until the following July. So nearly a year has gone by, 6 months since the Kriya, Keshav in Delhi was his secretary at the time, and booked his appointments, and I twisted Keshava's arm to get this appointment. I mean, I had been bugging him, I don't even know how long. March, April, and one thing always, sometimes we'd have an appointment, but then it had to be canceled, or, this or the other thing kept happening. And finally in July, Keshava said, okay, he can meet with you, whatever, today or tomorrow or something, but he's not feeling well. So if you feel like canceling, it would be okay. And I was like, no, I want to meet him. so I, it was like, if he's feeling well enough to even say yes at all, then I want to do it. So I went in, and I was scared to death. I just, I didn't know. Is he reading my thoughts? Is he, I mean, it's like, I suppose these are all typical devotee responses, but they were double or triple in my case. But I sat down. He was sitting on a chair. I sat down on the floor, so I'm looking up at him. And after greeting him, and he was very quiet. He was very inward. But I just asked him very frankly. I said, "What should our relationship be?" And his response, now this may sound a little surprising, but his immediate response was, "I'm not a master." And I didn't ask him that, so I didn't know what to say. And my question was still out there because he hadn't really answered it yet. But that was his way of beginning. But what he said then was, "Think of me as a friend and counselor." And of course I did. I could perfectly well accept that. What he was saying is, I'm not your guru now in that sense. And he didn't really formally ever say that publicly to anyone, or in a public way, he didn't. But that was a beginning point. And then what was interesting is the conversation then proceeded, and I was hoping that he would just kind of take me by the shoulders and, guide my life, And what I didn't realize, what I didn't know at the time, was that I was essentially coming to him as a beggar. And I had my little begging cup, my little tiny cup, psychically saying, "Please, sir, please fill my little cup with a few grains of rice," or whatever. And I think he was a bit fed up with that kind of attitude, not so much from me personally, because he didn't know me. This was our first encounter. But I think he had dozens and hundreds of people who were just basically saying to Swamiji, "You were blessed by the Master. You have dedicated your life. We want what you have. Give it to us freely, without us doing anything to earn it or to sort of be able to receive it more completely." And so I would ask him a question in this interview, and he would answer yes, or no, as the case may be, whatever. And then there was silence. And and this happened 3 or 4 times. And I was hoping for a lecture. I was hoping for a discourse. I was hoping for the guidance of a lifetime. And I wasn't getting it, and it was very uncomfortable. And as I said, I was scared to death. But at a certain point, I had this instinct, and I don't know where it came from. It must have come from Master. But I just said to him, "Swamiji, is there something I can do to help you?" And instantly the energy changed. Because instantly he was now, and the funny thing was that his response was, "No, what's to be done anyway?" And absolutely, segueing onto what Nirmala was saying earlier, there was everything to be done. There was nothing that didn't need to be done. But here was this 20-year-old who didn't know how to do anything, who had hardly developed any energy. I mean, I had been in school my whole life. There was nothing that I could really help him with. But I hoped that I could travel with him. I expressed that at the time. I hoped that I could learn from him. I articulated, I feel like there's a great deal I could learn from you. Well, obviously there was a great deal I could learn from him. But I wasn't ready to learn it yet because I hadn't put out the energy myself yet. And so I say all of this by way of introduction because it's easy for us to feel badly, oh, but I didn't have those experiences. Well, all of us didn't have the experience of living with Master. And disciples of Master who were his direct disciples didn't have the experience of living with Sri Yukteswar. I mean, you could keep on going back and back and back, and and none of us have lived with Babaji, at least that we know, or in this lifetime. Well, the point is to make the best of what we have now. You all in India have Jayaji when he can come, Dhyanaji, Devarshiji, Jyotishji, Deviji are coming shortly, in early September. You all have great souls all around you, and all of you are great souls waiting to be awakened and in process of developing all this. Every one of us has a service to render. Every one of us has a gift, a blessing to share. And that blessing, of course, begins in our practice of Kriya, yes. So we have to you can't give something that you don't own. You can't give something that you don't have. So of course, yes, we have to have that. But then so much more is needed in terms of how we serve. I remember when we landed in India and we began teaching, and Devarshiji in those days paid a visit to India. This was long before he moved there. But he made several visits. But early on, he helped us get our website together. And we posted up this website and we began, teaching classes around. And people were like, well, you can't charge money for those classes. And we were like, well, how would we pay the bills? How would we pay for the advertising? We have to charge money. And then it was like, okay, well, you can charge a little bit of money. Okay, so fine, we charged a little bit of money. But then they were saying, but what are you doing to uplift the society? And we were like, oh, we're just trying to survive at the moment, thank you very much. But so much is needed. And it isn't just the widows in Brindaban, it's also that. But everywhere you turn, there is someone who needs help. And the whole world needs the blessing of God's presence. The whole world needs to be uplifted with an awareness of Dwapara Yuga, an awareness of energy as the prime reality in our lives. Kriya teaches us that. And so we look to Swamiji as an example of this because he epitomized, he gave us this tremendous force of energy. I had a fascinating little discussion with Drupada, who's a marvelous astrologer, Vedic astrologer. Some of you perhaps have had readings from him. And in this little discussion, and he's a wonderful Kriya yogi since many decades, 40 years or more, and one of his comments about Swamiji was, Swamiji is a Brahma yogi, as opposed to many or Brahma master. In other words, many who come on the spiritual life who are dedicated and who are in that kind of role as a teacher are Shiva-oriented. Get away from this delusion, break the Maya, etc. Very few are in that creative way of the Brahma energy, the creative energy. And Swamiji gave us that. And his comment was, we're at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. Kali Yuga, all this form, all these old ways of looking at the world and very fixed kind of dogmatic understandings of spirituality and religion, they all pretty much have to be broken and replaced by an energetic awareness. So it takes creativity. It takes a new expression of that. And Swamiji brought that. And he was endlessly creative, as Nirmalaji was mentioning. He was always having a project. In fact, the only times we were really nervous around him, later in life when we lived with him, was when one project had ended and the next one had not yet begun. And he was kind of in this in-between place because it was very uncomfortable wondering what the next one was going to be. And I think in some ways it was even a little uncomfortable for him because what will Master ask next? And he would sometimes get very serious or even seemingly a little bit somber. But actually what it was he was very inward. He was very centered inside, and that can appear to someone who has not experienced it, that can appear a little intimidating or a little bit remote and even a little stern. And of course, Master could be very stern, as we have read from Swamiji. Sri Yukteswarji could be quite drastically stern. But Swamiji didn't usually express that outwardly, but he was trying to tune in. What is Master asking now? And so all of us in our lives, we have learned Kriya. We're going to practice here in a few minutes. And then tomorrow morning will be another day. We'll take up our Kriya again. And then the day will come after our morning practice of Kriya. And whatever the day brings, our job is to express that Kriya, to live that Kriya in all of our interactions. And that means in the house, that means with the people, perhaps in our career or our family. That means when we leave the house and go and, when I move forth through crowded ways, as the chant says, in my heart, Lord, ever so silently, I will always think of Thee. Energetically, we have to reference that, dial that back in. So tune into those little pieces.